Italy has been long regarded as the sick man of Europe. It's been recently jolted by a political earthquake. Led by Giorgia Meloni, the Brothers of Italy, a right-wing party, won 26% of the votes in the 2022 elections and became the largest party in parliament. This allowed the right to form a majority government and Meloni to become the first female prime minister in Italian history. The mainstream media outside Italy calls Brothers of Italy an extreme right-wing party. But is it possible that Meloni will deliver on her promises and allow Italy to realize its incredible potential? Is it time to look at European investment opportunities? Under what scenarios will Europe underperform or outperform the United States? Hi, I'm David Woo, a former Wall Street strategist with a 20-year track record of making actionable predictions about major global change. Welcome to the Money Game, where I take on groupthink, propaganda, and conspiracy theories in my critical analysis of markets, economics, and politics. Before we begin, please hit subscribe and the bell button so that you will be notified when a new video comes out. I'm in Milan today in search of answers for some of the questions that I've got about what's happening in Europe, especially about what's happening in Italy. And joining me this morning, we've got Patrizia Bussoli, good friend of mine, who is a professor of finance in Venice, and she's also the partner of Bea Finance, a private consultancy firm. And she was the most senior woman in asset allocation in the investment industry in Italy for the last 20 years, in an industry that's dominated by men. She's done spectacularly well. I have great respect for her thoughts and especially her take on things, everything Europe. And by the way, she just published a great book called Investing in the Times of Central Banking. She knows a lot about the ECB, the European Central Bank, and what that means for investing in Europe. Thank you very much for joining me today, Patrizia.
Thank you very much, David, for inviting me for this exciting talk and for your introduction. I appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to see you.
So obviously, sort of like the world has been taken by storm by, sort of the election of the Brothers of Italy party, which a lot of people have never heard of outside Italy until recently. And then Giorgia Meloni, all of a sudden, now is the first, female prime minister in Italy. It's a huge deal. It's an earthquake, it seems to me, in Italy. But a lot of people outside Italy are calling this party an extreme right-wing party, a fascist party. What do the average Italian think about, the Brothers of Italy and about Meloni?
Well, it's not an easy question. This has been an election in which we have the least participation of people going to vote first. So we were missing 40% of people. Okay, so first. We have people that are blue collars and basically and unemployed people voted for Meloni. And while youngest people, that is people that are below 34, were voting for 5 stars. And therefore we are looking, people are going to extremes, and they're sort of looking for a change, and they're looking for people or politicians that seem very convincing in addressing their issues. In a world in which government debt on average now is going above 100%
Sure.
of GDP, who should be able to create new jobs in this type of world? At the end of the day, are entrepreneurs. And therefore, at the end, probably people, blue collars, they are understanding this much quicker than other people at the end of the day. So you need to have policies that are much more friendly with companies.
Maybe the general public, has reached a certain economic literacy, that they understand that more handouts is not going to create more jobs. And that, so from that point of view, they're much more likely to actually perhaps support, free marketers, as a way to basically create jobs and trickle down economy. So I think that obviously, if that's a new trend, that's a very interesting thing. Blue collars and the poor people tend to be more resentful perhaps of illegal immigrants, right? Which has become a major issue in Italy, at least in this election. Meloni has said that, her issue, of course, and this is why she's calling this bitter fights with France at the moment, is that she says, well, it takes forever to have them to process them for their, asylum-seeking application. Then basically they're just stuck in Italy, and Italy becomes a refugee camp for basically these illegals. And she thinks that's not fair. And obviously that is resonating with perhaps some of the people who did vote for her. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, do you think that there is a way that Italy is going to be able to resolve this current dispute with Europe?
First of all, I think that sometimes there is too much attention from media on absolute numbers and not on relative numbers. Because when we are talking about the numbers of asylum seekers, the numbers of people that actually are entering into Italy, basically is, in terms of asylum seekers, is 1.4% of the total worldwide. But if you consider this number in terms of refugees, we are around 0.36%. Within Europe, the country that actually is hosting the majority of refugees is Germany at the end of the day. So first, sometimes there is a problem with media, allow me to say,
sure,
in the way actually these information are provided. The second thing is that there are two other issues. At the European level, there is a new pact on asylum and migration that has 9 points basically of recommendations. And since the end of 2020 basically is under the discussion of the European Commission to change and improve. But basically there, in particular, one of these points is dedicated on how to behave in terms of managing the boats in the Mediterranean Sea from EU member states. And there is an obligation by all the states. Not only, I recall another thing that is generally is not written and has not been written on newspapers. In June 2018, the European Council recognized that the external borders are European borders. And this is important because then it changes basically the dialogue that the European member states can have on the way they have to manage this rescue, the rescued people.
Over the last 20 years, right? You know, every few years, a new superstar is born in Italian politics. I still remember, like, when Renzi first came on the scene, everybody said that this guy's amazing. He was young, like he was, you know, basically very smart politically. And then came, of course, basically Grillo, who everybody thought was going to transform the landscape of Italian politics. And of course, Salvini, I mean, who was a big talker, who did very well, again, very young. Obviously, you know, it's been very disappointing to watch all these three because they simply didn't deliver. Certainly, there was more hype than actually anything actually done. And I think perhaps this is the reason why the turnout in the last election was so low, because like the Italians at this point, they try everything, they see all these basically great geniuses come and go. The question now is about Meloni. Is there anything about her that recommends her from the point of view of being more pragmatic, someone who's going to get the job done, in your view?
You don't only need probably an attitude or an approach that seems to be much more pragmatic than her predecessors. But at the end of the day, what makes the difference? And you need to have a vision, you need to have a plan. Not only small things to be done in the short term, but actually to understand how these small things will bring you forward. And in particular because Italy, like the rest of Europe, has an issue. We need to invest in growth, and we have to test her if there is actually a program, but a program with long-term goals.
I mean, the last 20 years, Italy has been sort of the segment of Europe, right? I mean, if you think about, like, you know, average GDP growth in the last 20 years, it's probably one of the lowest in the world. Now, it's true that the population is shrinking, but still, maybe the population shrinking itself is basically, it's the consequence of basically the lack of, you know, essentially the energy of the economy and opportunities. So the question really is, can Italy reinvent itself to become the sort of the economy we know Italy's capable of? Because what happened in the 50s and 60s, Italy was like, you know, it was amazing. And then a lot of people said it was because, like, after Italy joined the EU, with all the bureaucracy, all the regulations that really kill Italy's basically, you know, sort of inherent drive. Now, so the question is, with the 200 billion euros that Meloni is now going to get from the EU for the pandemic, essentially the fund, is she going to be able to reinvent the Italian economy? What I'm saying is that Italy's got so much to offer, right? I mean, just think about, like, you know, the amount of stuff that Italy produces, the world covets every single day, from furniture to wine, from clothes. I mean, when it comes to manufacturing, basically Italy, has always been, has been able to basically get very high, basically margin, essentially goods. So services, I mean, everybody wants to come on vacation, Italy and so on and so forth. So, I mean, how does she basically take something like Italy with 200 billion euros and recreate this economy and turn it into a world-class economy that we know again?
I think this is the greatest opportunity Italy has since the Second World War at the end of the day. And actually it has to be managed well in a credible way. Also because the money we receive from the European Union has two big points. First, is the money we can receive only if we deliver. And therefore it's introducing a new concept of sort of, allow me to say, public type of expenditure. It has to be proved and it has to be monitorable through time. So this is a novelty, let's say, for the time of approach. We, in Italy in particular, politicians said on average with respect to public expenditure. The second thing, we have to think that this plan has been thought to be as a sort of the seed capital that is supposed to attract private capital. Therefore, the amount of money that can be directed to all the investment that I will comment upon actually can be much bigger, can be at least twice what we are getting from European Union. So that's the important part. So this is money that has to create confidence in entrepreneurs, in investors. And therefore, this is the huge opportunity. And therefore I truly believe it can be really a game changer. It can be a game changer for Italy, but it can be a game changer for Europe, because the possibility for Italy to grow and to overcome its sickness, if you allow me to say, a sickness, I would like to highlight that is a lack in terms of productivity growth, and part of this productivity growth depends basically on two factors. One is lack of investments, and the other is a diminishing role of labor and quality of labor. Therefore, these two factors are important. So, if you're good at and being convincing, not only, of course, the parliament, but entrepreneurs and investors, that these investments actually are producing the radical change Italy needs, you can really be successful.
But isn't it also true that lack of investment, if we want to call it as such, is also basically a reflection of the structure of the Italian economy, right? You've got a lot of small, medium-sized enterprises, family-owned for the most part, and so from that point of view, and also we know that the banking system, certainly the last 10 years, become very risk-averse. So it hasn't been always easy to secure, basically capital and loans, and therefore you're much more dependent on the savings of the family to basically keep going and so on and so forth. So you don't have the scale, right? Because you've got a lot of little companies trying to basically raise money, and then obviously if you're little, the credit risk, perceived credit risk is going to be higher, therefore your ability to get loans, is going to be more limited. Certainly your cost of borrowing is going to be higher than elsewhere. So the question really is, in my view, is like, how do you basically address that? Because in some sense, small is also beautiful at the same time. Because, I mean, you could argue like one of the reasons why Italy has been able to weather the big changes that's happened around the world the last 20 years, because you have all these small, medium-sized companies. If 20% of them get wiped out, you still have 80%. It's not like one big company, if it goes down, the mothership comes down, the whole thing goes down. So how does one basically preserve the sort of the entrepreneurship associated with these family, small enterprises, which has been the heart of the Italian, basically experiment, at the same time, basically getting them to invest more?
There are different issues that are also cultural issues, and you tackled one of the major, that is sometimes there is an intersection between what is the wealth of the company and the wealth of the family behind the company. And the other point is also to help family and convince that they can receive money not only through the banking sector. This is the other radical change. You need to diversify the sources of your financing. And we have plenty of money, for instance, in the financial industry that can be directed. Therefore, I see bigger roles, for instance, for private equity, venture capitals, helping families. And why this is important? Because if I look at the macro data, the recent macro data, the trade balance is starting to get negative. This is the first time over 10 years. So this is a signal to me. We need to speed up this process. So this is the opportunity. And conceptually, we need to focus more on cooperation, not on competition. Competition gives you the idea that one is against the other. Cooperation instead paves the way on concentrating on the objective we have to reach together and how actually we can create synergies. So we need, and this is true at Italian level, at the small, medium enterprises, but also at the European level. We get out of this crisis, in particular addressing the weaknesses of Europe. So that is, there are two layers, cultural, financial, and organizational at the same time. So if you are able to address and be convincing, and this helps you to give a vision for the future.
The question, of course, is whether Meloni understands that, right? Because that is really the vision. I totally agree with you about bankruptcy. I mean, I think you need basically bankruptcy law probably closer to the U.S. to get people to take risks. Because clearly the Italians don't have any issue taking risk, right? I mean, this is a country that spends more money than anywhere else on, basically gambling on games, right? Basically like sports betting. I mean, it's a lottery. So the Italians, they understand the concept of risk. They like taking risk, and so from that point of view, it's about basically, obviously, making it cheaper for them to take a risk. I just came from Torino. I mean, it was the chocolate in Torino was really excellent. One after another was like world class. And yet, when I go to the airport, any airport in the world, you see Swiss chocolate, you see Belgian chocolate, Italian chocolate, you see maximum basically Baci. That's about it. Right? But clearly, Baci is not even considered that good in Italy. So the question is, why aren't more, basically Italian chocolate labels more famous? They should be at least as famous as the Swiss or the Belgian or anybody else for that matter. If they're not, because they're small, I think. And therefore, the ability to do to undertake huge, basically, marketing campaigns is limited. Something has to be done here because clearly Italy is now monetizing what is already producing, forget about anything else. Now the question is, does Meloni understand that? Does she have people around who understands that? Because in some sense, the solution is pretty obvious. Now she has a decisive majority in parliament with two parties that are market friendly, so supposedly, especially Berlusconi. So the question is, what can they deliver? Do you think, based on the people in this government, do they understand the problem? Do they understand what has to be done?
You touched the heart of the problem. We don't have this capability of envision scalability of our projects. Okay, to think big. That's typical of the American at the end of the day. But we have the art, we have the creativity, we have the differentiation. In terms of government, is it able? There are some good technicians. Some other technicians have changed, and some of those are, unfortunately, were the ones with the vision. Okay, so we need to test in the next month whether actually the group of people that will work for her will be able to manage this situation. So it's let's say a sort of yes and no answer so far, but also I think the market can help in this sense, because the market can put a lot of pressure on the government, and she's very good in understanding whether she has to change attitude, okay, and to change direction. So I think the good part is that the market will be, let's say, a severe judge and can put pressure on her, in particular on rates, on government bonds, and this is the most sensitive issue.
Let's just say we do go into a recession of sorts. I mean, would you say that European bonds at this point are, because usually bonds do well in the recession, do you think bonds are attractive? Would you be basically putting your own clients' money into European bonds right now, given you're expecting a recession?
I think that we should look at, of course, we have to consider Europe by itself and cross-market correlations, okay? So also because despite the fact diminished, European bonds are correlated to the US Treasury, okay? So I think the 5-year is a good part of the curve so far, and in particular because we are reaching let's say there can be some still volatility and some adjustments, but the 5 years is a good proxy in terms also of return and that we have so far and the yield we have so far. It's a good combination in terms of covering you for risk and for duration risk itself.
What about stocks? I mean, European stocks have done extremely well ever since Olaf Scholz visited China. Literally, the German stock market is almost 20%, right? You know, like I can understand the 20% rally probably was because the market was very short, underweight European equities. At this point, like, do you see any value in European equities?
I think there's the scope for some volatility in the sense that what I've seen in the expected earnings, the recession is almost priced, and it needed to adjust it a bit more, and the price were right there, so we can still have some another leg of volatility, but I think in summertime we have seen the floor of the values of the stock exchanges. Of course, we have to take into account that part of the rallies, in particular on the S&P 500, is due to the energy at the same time. So I'm working also on indices X energy, of course, just to take this effect out. And I think, as we along the lines of what we were discussing before, I think Europe has to be seen in terms of long-term strategy, much more than on short-term adjustment. And therefore, looking for sectors that actually could benefit for the going forward adjustment. Therefore, energy and renewable sector for Europe is a sort of a weapon on the way to overcome the risk of stagflation as well, as we mentioned before. So it can be an edge. And therefore, all the investments of technology and therefore in sectors in technology, in particular applied to other sectors like agriculture, it's important because that is going to achieve the sustainability aim and also the improvement and putting lower pressure on food prices, for instance.
Right. So for a very simple, let's say, asset allocation for, let's just say, a retail, investor. I mean, how much of it would you put in bonds? How much would you put in stocks? And how much would you put in cash right now?
Okay, let's say, I would say that now is a good time to be neutral. If we consider, for instance, a 50-50, I would stay neutral in terms of equity. I will start to build up some duration in the bond portfolio. I will still have an overweight of US with respect to Europe because of the risk actually we mentioned, and the overweight, I will create the overweight going forward then in the next leg of volatility with Europe.
So you actually will be underweight Europe versus the US at this point still?
Yes, at this point, yes.
In stocks or in bonds?
In stocks.
In stocks.
In stocks, yes.
And why do you say that? It's because you think, because in some sense the downside risk to Europe is still greater than the US because of the geopolitical risk, because we just don't know what's going to happen.
Because the downside risk on growth is bigger for Europe than for the US, in the sense that the risk for a recession in the US is a technical recession, while for Europe it can be or deeper or longer. If it's not deep, it can be longer. And therefore, this will weigh basically on expected profits of European companies. So in relative terms, I think, especially on the short term, the S&P should overperform, a net of exchange rate should overperform European stocks. But once we have cleared out the impact of the energy cost on European companies, we can start to go, to go longer on European stocks.
So let's just say this type of situation, right? Because obviously the US outperformed Europe this year, but the point here is that in a bad world, let's just say we go into a global recession, right? I guess Europe will underperform the US in that scenario simply because, you've got the labor market is less flexible. There are a lot of issues in Europe which will be compounded if we were to go into a recession, global recession that's particularly deep, right? Then people are going to be talking about breakup risk and so on and so forth. So you would agree with that, right? In a bad scenario, Europe will underperform. The question is, what scenario in which Europe actually will outperform? For example, let's say the war, in Ukraine were to end tomorrow, Do you think that will be a situation that will basically see Europe outperform?
Yes, the end of the war tomorrow, a peace agreement is for sure positive for Europe, 100%. And second, also the idea if we start to have or paving the way for a backstop from the European Union in terms of counter-cyclical measures, that is another big stone to support the European equity market.
Right. Well,
and and the other point is that let's say a diminishing tension between US and China.
Yeah. Would that be basically, do you think Europe will outperform in that scenario or underperform, by the way?
It could overperform because it will relax the relationship in terms of trade market between Europe and China, because it will not affect the geopolitical tension. Because at the end of the day, Europe is an ally of the US. Okay, so how can you be an ally of the US if the tension between US and China will increase and you increase your trade with China? I think we have a problem.
Well, that's why it's interesting, right? Olaf Scholz went to China and said that Germany does not want to decouple from China. That Germany says that the world is becoming more multipolar and that Germany wants to do business with all the rising powers in the world. At least from a German standpoint, I mean, it seems that this government at least understands that at the end of the day, you're elected into power in order to serve, the welfare and interests of your own people, as opposed to the welfare and interests of your allies.
I mean, there's a positive and negative side of the action of Scholz. On the one hand, actually, he had the intuition that probably the bipolar world is painful for Europe. Okay. But the problem, to get to a multipolar world, we need a European identity to make it truly multipolar. Okay, so the bad side is that should you do as a German country, or you should instead create a consensus in this way within Europe to make Europe be one of the other polars that is missing at this point in time?
I think that's an excellent point, because the people, we all know the architects of Europe, the European Union, were people who thought exactly that Europe was going to basically become another bloc, okay, so that, the world did not become just basically US, at the time basically the Soviet Union, that there was going to be a third bloc, that was going to be Europe, that also, basically Europeans understood, that basically this was the only way that they can pull together their resources and challenge the US to some extent. So I think if we go into a multipolar world, I tend to agree with you that Europe probably will become even more European, in the sense that will be the only way they're going to be able to survive and actually prosper.
I agree with you, and Europe has three reasons to go for that. They're dealing with migration, they're dealing with energy policy, and they're dealing with defense policy.
Yeah, exactly. Especially you can see what's happening in the UK, right? I mean, it's just been like, I think after what happened in the UK the last couple of years, especially lately, I think the appetite for any European country to follow, the UK out of the EU is probably very limited at this point.
I agree 100%. And also because we know that a more open economy can create a bigger level of welfare, doesn't guarantee an equal distribution of welfare, but it can create higher wealth within the system first. And the second, also what recently happened in the UK is telling you if you are going on a wrong foot on the fiscal policy, you are making a damage to your country. So this is a ring the bell from Meloni at the same time, and at the end to really construct a backbone at the European level. So we have the opportunity, we have to go for that.
On that note, thank you very much, Patrizia, for joining me today, and I learned a lot. I hope our audience as well. Appreciate
Thank you very much, David.